Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss one of the ghosts of Tory past speeches at the conference, the Conservative conference, made by Jacob Rees-Mogg. It is, if anything, even more insane than the strategies proposed by Tory leadership contenders who think it's a good idea to become a sort of shadow of Reform UK in order to win. Rees-Mogg wants Tory candidates to stand down in order to let Reform UK win way more seats, specifically in order to let them hold his own party hostage, in his mind, as it forms a minority government. But first, for daily political commentary, please click the subscribe button so you don't miss out. So, Tory party conference, it's like a graveyard this year. And I don't mean because the mood is a bit glum because they lost the election and they lost it really badly. I mean, that's normal. That sort of happens. What is not normal is that so many of the speakers at the conference making the news are basically Tory failures. You know, you've had Liz Truss, big event there. Penny Mordaunt, Jacob Rees-Mogg. It's like they all lost their seats. I mean, aside from the leadership contenders, like where are the other Tories? The ones who are in Parliament right now trying to rebuild their party, or the ones who are viewed as up and coming talents for the party. You know, you're reading the reports on the conference. It's like watching the ghosts of Tory past. And the problem is as well, you can't even say, oh, these are ones who've given service and now they're trying to rally the troops so that we can rebuild. They're all trying to urge the party to do mad things. But, you know, you could say the policies of the leadership rivals look like the ghosts of Tory past as well, I suppose. It's in keeping. They all have slightly different positions on key issues, but they are all still backing policies of one form or another that provably failed in power. And some of the things being said are quite remarkable. Liz Truss is now running so short of people to blame for her own insanity. You know what she did yesterday? She tried to blame Clement Attlee, a former Prime Minister who died before she was born. But Jacob Rees-Mogg offered up, I thought, the most interesting brand of insanity for me because it speaks to my interest in electoral strategy. Now, I'll begin by saying he actually did say something that's actually worth repeating. And it should be a lesson for all politicians or all people in politics, because not everything he says is crazy or even wrong. He said that the Tories should not behave as if Reform stole their votes. He said, nobody steals votes, you have to win them. Absolutely correct. And how everyone should view vote shifting from one party or candidate to another. You can think that the other party lied to get those votes, sure. But at the end of the day, you have to win votes. But anyway, back to the main point, and Rees-Mogg's proposal is simple. Could sound appealing to a Conservative in those simple terms, but I think it falls apart when you consider the practical outcomes. So he essentially said that the Conservatives should stand down candidates in about 100 seats, I think he said 98, where Reform UK would be best placed to win, and this would result in a Conservative government once more. Now, before I go over how mad this is when you consider it in detail, let us first of all point out you cannot simply add up Reform and Conservative votes and assume that if one stood aside for the other, all of those votes would transfer. There are plenty of Conservative voters who despise Reform UK, will not vote for them, and vice versa. And do not treat with too much credibility anything that suggests you can just add up those votes. And also, if the offer were reciprocated, you know, like I say, there are plenty of Reform voters who won't vote for a Conservative candidate. They'll just vote for nobody. In addition, when considering the seats where Reform won more votes than the Conservatives but lost the seat, it was almost always Labour that won. Now, as long as Labour deliver tangible benefits on key issues before the next election, and of course that will be their top priority, their vote should actually be boosted in those areas. So even the Conservatives standing aside wouldn't automatically allow Reform UK to win anyway. But let's leave those points to one side for the moment. Let us suppose there was a viable strategy to stand Conservative candidates down in whatever, about 100 seats, allowing Reform UK to win a sizable chunk of them. The implication of what Rees-Mogg is saying is that this wouldn't deliver a majority Conservative government as such, because of course it can't. I mean, like in theory, I suppose you could say it could. If Reform stood aside for the Tories in seats where the Conservatives had the best chance. You know, if it was a full reciprocal arrangement, then yes, that could arguably allow the Conservatives to win many more seats. But that would require Reform UK to stand relatively few candidates as it happens. Would they be up for that? But anyway, the way Rees-Mogg seemed to be talking, I think he was talking about a large minority Conservative government propped up by or in coalition with Reform UK. Now, the idea of standing down candidates in no-hope seats in return for a boost in winnable seats, that is very appealing if that is the proposal. Indeed, many people wanted Labour and the Lib Dems to formalise an agreement to do exactly that for this election, but they instead just observed a sort of non-aggression arrangement unofficially. Because the first problem you have with a formal pact is the very reason neither Labour nor the Lib Dems wanted a pact of their own. You will outrage no small number of voters, and especially core voters. You know, there were plenty, for example, who vote Labour, many within the Labour Party, but even outside vote Labour, who would not like the idea of Labour getting into bed with the Lib Dems because, they blame those for austerity. And you know, and we're not just talking about in those seats, we mean everywhere else. So there'll be people who wouldn't vote for Labour if they thought they were getting into bed with the Lib Dems, right? The same thing happens. You know, you could risk losing more votes in key seats than you gain. And you also create a hell of a row within your own party. And the same could absolutely be the case for the Conservatives and Reform. Conservative supporters in particular may well change their vote if they think it's going to result in a government where Nigel Farage holds sway. In fact, I would expect Labour specifically to use the idea as an attack line, you know, in much the same. Do you remember in 2015? The Tories talked about, oh yeah, if you vote Labour, they can only get a minority government, so the SNP will hold the balance of power. Could do the same thing. An even bigger problem potentially is how the marriage of convenience would work in practice. So let's say you have numbers similar to 2010. You know, the Conservatives have more seats than anyone else, but not enough to form a majority. Let's say Reform, in place of the Lib Dems this time, have enough to make it a stable majority. Well, the Tories will find Reform UK MPs way less cooperative than the Lib Dems were in 2010. They will have such hard lines on everything that it could be impossible to get them to compromise on anything. You know, consider that the sort of candidates that Reform will mostly attract are those who have been used to being on the fringes of politics for a long time. They tend not to compromise. If a Conservative leader tells them to compromise or the coalition won't work, they'll just say, fine, have fun trying to govern as a minority party. They won't care. They'll be more than delighted to just be in Parliament. And Farage won't be able to twist their arm much because he'll be seen as watering down his principles, betraying them, and the grift would fall apart. And then there's the scandals. Now, it could be a while before the Tories ramp up their own scandals again, but they'll come thick and fast for Reform MPs. Imagine the stories coming out of various racist things they've said and done in the past, or associations with extremist groups, because there'll be a lot of scrutiny on them. The Conservatives will be forced to do one or two things. Do they dismiss them? The stories, the allegations, in order to maintain the partnership, meaning they could lose public support at the next election? Or do they disown them, these past behaviours, in which case they antagonise their new and essential political partners? The entire concept is a complete non-starter. It's actually dumber than the Tories trying to turn themselves into a pale imitation of Reform. Because at least that way of thinking, it's not credible, that way of thinking, but at least that way of thinking is we get those votes back and then we form a majority. Rees-Mogg's plan appears to be, we will be Reform UK's bitch. Because remember, the reason why senior Tories think they need to ape Reform is to attract some of their voters back without alienating the more moderate voters who still support them. This alliance would send a lot of those voters running into the arms of the Lib Dems, who I'm sure will be more than happy to add to their tally of 72 seats from this summer. In fact, if Labour do deliver tangible improvements in time for the election, which has to be expected, it's not certain, but it has to be expected, and the Tories do agree to a pact with Farage, you could actually see the practical end of the Conservative Party right there. Not that this appears to be a realistic proposal just yet. Like, none of the current Conservative leadership contenders are talking about that. They don't even seem to want to be too close to Nigel Farage, although their opposition to him varies. But it is possible that they would consider such a pact that means a mutual pulling of candidates. None have talked about it just yet, but it wouldn't make sense to talk about it now. This is the sort of thing you arrange in the second half of the Parliament, not right at the start, you know, when you're forming your election strategy. But the problem with this strategy is that it always seems to be based on woefully improbable assumptions. Chief amongst them, Reform and Conservative votes being interchangeable. when they are not. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, you can join for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.